Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I'm Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. It is the day after Christmas. We're going to start out this way. Nate, does the Atkins family, because Nate was back in Columbus for Christmas, does the Atkins family have a traditional Christmas dinner? Does it change every year? What do you guys do?
It's fairly traditional. We always eat it it's pretty normal dinner time, like 6 o'clock, and it's usually it's some kind of roasted bird. So that's the thing that changes. Sometimes it's been chicken, sometimes it's been turkey, and this year was turkey, which kind of doubles up on Thanksgiving, but I still think it fits pretty well. So it's that and a bunch of different sides. So I guess it's kind of similar to Thanksgiving. It's just the sides are usually less the Thanksgiving sides and more creative stuff sometimes. And so, yeah, that's what we do. How about you?
I think I finally found the Erickson household traditional Christmas dinner. It's taken me a little while to figure it out. We've tried lamb at times. There's been some Italian like pasta years. We've been trying to look for something special. This time we went beef tenderloin. Which like the key is because I do a lot of stuff on this. Yes, but also I mean the beef tenderloin is a fantastic cut.
Oh yeah, I know we had that for Christmas Eve, so I feel you.
As a long-standing member of the people who get to go to beefsteak at St. Elmo's, which is an if you know you know situation. If not, I'll let you guys Google it. Beef tenderloin's a great cut. The biggest thing though is as like I do a lot of stuff on the smoker. You don't want to do a long smoke on Christmas Day because you don't want to be going to the smoker when kids might be getting up for the start of Christmas morning. So I've kind of messed with it a little bit. Tenderloin isn't the same way. You still get some low and slow in there, but not nearly as much. So it turned out great. It turned out great. So I think that's where we're going to stick.
Good choice.
Yeah, really, really, really delicious. Colts were obviously off for Wednesday's practice. The big story today is that Anthony Richardson was estimated to not practice yesterday with foot and back injuries. When we were out there a couple hours ago, he was not practicing again today. This is Thursday. A team source just told me that they're optimistic that he's going to be able to play. But they're going to find out a lot more on Friday. You kind of asked him, I don't know if you had a tip or anything, but you kind of asked him about how his body was holding up over the course of the season. And the answer at first to me didn't seem super revealing until he was out of practice the next day.
Well, that's the thing. It was weird because normally we talk to him on Wednesdays and they practice Wednesday. And so it's very it's supposed to be connected to what's going on. That one was a little different, whereas the morning of Christmas Eve and they had an estimated practice the next day. And when I saw the estimation, I didn't know, that just seemed like a rest thing. Today showed you it's a little bit more than that. But yeah, he mostly talked about how he's always felt sore after any NFL game. That was one of the biggest adjustments to him. And I remember that held true after his first game against the Jaguars. He said he felt things he'd never felt before, that the hits they just register a little different at this level. So he more or less said that he's been he's kind of been sore no matter what. I just kind of felt that it wasn't so much a tip about an injury, but I just, that they transitioned him in that game on Sunday against the Titans to such a run focus. And some of the runs too were sort of he was their short yardage option. So he was lowering the shoulder and taking the boom on, third and one, and he did it at the goal line. So yeah, I was just kind of curious what the toll of that is and how they manage that now that it feels like Sunday was somewhat the start for as long as it can go of a different style of offense, at least a really, really run-focused offense. And it worked. Obviously, they got a franchise record in rushing, but that's, it tapped into that other side of that conversation we've had with him, which is how to use his rushing ability without overextending and over-risking it. And now he's at the stage where he's stacked together, finishing a bunch of games now. But there is a toll to that. So I think that's what we're seeing right now. He's listed with, was it foot and back injuries? So usually when there's two of those pop up at the same time, but he didn't miss any plays on Sunday. It feels like a pretty sore situation, which is what he's dealt with that a couple of times before, where he's been on the injury report. I think even the week that he got benched, he was on there for something new that. So sometimes these things pop up that they just get a little bit of addressing to, and I guess today they wanted to, if what you're hearing from the team source, that they're optimistic. It sounds like it's kind of erring on the side of caution late in the season when a lot of his role right now is to be physical and be a runner, and so they need that to be fresh and available. And so I think that's just the hope right now.
It's hard. It's hard to like handicap exactly what to expect injury wise, because like my initial thought is he's such a physical runner and he's been such a physical presence since getting back in, especially at the goal line. Very unafraid to put his head down and get in the end zone. That you think like, well, he's going to take more injuries because of that. There's a part of me that wonders if this is just life in the NFL, especially as a running quarterback, because Lamar Jackson, I do not think of as a physical runner. I think of him as a dazzling runner, but he's not necessarily like the kind of guy that you're gonna call the play for, where he's gonna get one-on-one with somebody and have to bowl him into the end zone. And even Lamar has dealt with some availability issues. Maybe not as much the last 2 seasons, but the 2 seasons before that, when he's still fairly young, he's missed some games. He's played with some stuff. It just seems like that's just part of, Anthony's got close to 500, almost 500 yards right now, essentially 500 yards. You just wonder if this is just kind of what you should expect, depending on, who knows how long he's the starting quarterback in Indianapolis. But it kind of feels like if you're going to have a running quarterback, this is what you're going to deal with.
Yeah, I think so. Lamar's an interesting case for this, because I feel like his career has fluctuated in and out of conversations of he's really durable to he's an injury risk. A couple of years ago, it was, it's how can you pay a guy who's missed games late in the season? And then, they had a stretch there where he missed looks like 10 games over the course of 21 and 22. That was rearing up for that conversation about the contract. And then the past 2 years, he hasn't missed a single game to injury since they locked in that deal. Part of that was last year they cut down the rushing attempts somewhat. I guess not a ton. Overall, they've cut him down from sort of his early peak, but they're still higher than what Anthony's doing right now. Anthony's at 7.8 this season. It's been trending up since the benching, and that's kind of where you expect that to go. I remember we had these conversations a lot in the preseason about that whole topic of how do they keep Anthony upright, but like make him a running quarterback and tap into that skill set. And I think the number I remember throwing around, or the one that's at least been in my head, is that I thought if he played 14 games, that this would be a pretty durable season, understanding that life as a running quarterback is often going to cost you a game or 2 or 3. It has for Jalen Hurts. It has for Lamar Jackson. Josh Allen's been the exception. And right now, Anthony is on pace he's missed 2 games to injury. Now, that whole understanding how many games he'd play is obviously different because he missed 2 for the benching. But he's so far missed 2 to injury. If he were to miss on Sunday, if it doesn't progress the way they want it to, that'd be 3 games. That's kind of the amount that I thought. If he misses 3, then he's a normal running quarterback they used a lot. More than 3, I think you start to have some conversation or concerns with last year with, is he durable? So it's just interesting that this pops up now, because I was just thinking coming at it when I asked that question to him, part of it on Tuesday, part of it was this idea that like he's mostly gotten through, at least for right now, out of the woods of what was the big conversation for him, which is, can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? He's strung together however many games it's been. He hasn't had to, I don't think he's left due to injury since the last time he missed a game, which was for injury, which was against the Jaguars back in week 5. Week 6 was the Titans the last time he did that. So it's been a couple months of a pretty good durability from him, but this goes to show you it's not a forever conversation. And I do think that's just going to be part of who it is, because especially what we know of him right now, all the evidence suggests that like for him to succeed, he has to run the ball. And for them to succeed, for them to hit a high gears in offense, he has to have a rushing element. And I think like the number you threw out, I think the last pod, 9 to 11 attempts a game, like that's Lamar at his peak was around 11. I think that's for where Anthony is right now. That's probably the best way to get the most out of him. And when you run 9 to 11 times a game, there's going to be risk like this, and there's going to be times that he needs some time off, Wednesdays especially. So that's the thing too. Is the thing to consider is like we hear a lot about the rookie wall for obviously little rookies, and they talk about it this late in the season since they haven't played this many games in a year. Well, he's never gotten like the full pro season either. So there's a bit of a rookie wall, I think, physically adjustment to like the longest season he's had before this was 13. I think he made it 12 starts at Florida. So he's running right up there this year. This Sunday, if he's able to make it, would be his 12th start. So I think there's just some physical adjustment to it as well. But even as he matures and he gets stronger and he gets older, this is a conversation to some degree I think we're going to consistently have for as long as he's the quarterback here.
Yeah, the other guy that I think of, I think his style reminds me the most of Cam Newton. The quarterbacks are not necessarily known for being as bruising as these guys are. Newton definitely was. You look at his attempts, and Newton. Let me read the attempts first, and then I'll get to what's kind of hard to figure out with Newton. Newton rushing attempts, 126 in 16 games as a rookie, 127 in 16 his second year, 111, 103 in 14, 132 in 16. 2016 he may have been hurt because he had 90 in 15 games. He did miss 2 games. 139 in 17, that's the career high. So he's kind of always in that somewhere between 110 to 135 range, 140 range, which math-wise, you look 75 to 85%, or 7.5 to 8.5 carries a game, I think is what I'm looking for. The weird thing with Newton, and this is why it's, I think, hard to compare them, is that Cam Newton was actually pretty darn durable until he wasn't. He played all 16 games. He played all 16 games his first 3 seasons in the NFL. He missed 2 in 14. So he only missed 2 games in his first. That's remarkable, given that he carried the ball something like 600 times. Missed 1 game the next year. Played another full season. So we're looking at 7 seasons into his career, just 3 missed games. Then missed 2 in 2018. So at this point, 8 seasons in, Cam Newton had been very, very durable, only missed, I think, 5 games, and then he just completely fell off the table in terms of his physical health. That's kind of a different thing than what we're dealing with Richardson, despite the similarity in running styles. That was more of a long-term issue than a short-term issue. I had forgotten he was so durable early on in his career.
Yeah, well, Cam had a really fascinating career for that reason, because it's like when he was just an absolute total battering ram, which is like Josh Allen now. But it's like what happened to Cam wasn't that he got, he just kind of got older. I mean, the injuries started kicking in at age 29, then age 30 was the big miss season, and then he got into his 30s, and that's the thing. You don't really think of a lot of older running quarterbacks, so it catches up to them either athletically or the toll of it. Josh Allen would be the other one who's like this run you over type of quarterback. And it feels like every conversation about Anthony's ceiling gets back to Josh Allen somehow. The interesting thing with Josh Allen, though, is I look at his numbers. So he's been incredibly durable too. He's missed it looks like 1 game. He's missed 1 game since his rookie year. That's remarkable. But one thing that he doesn't run as much per game as I would have guessed. His career high in attempts in any season was 7.8 per game in 2022. That's what Anthony's at right now. And we've talked a good amount about how I certainly have banged the drum to run him more. With Josh Allen, though, they were able to hit that mix by his third season where like he was a really good passer. So they're able to sort of dial some parts of the run game back and use him more for like high leverage moments. So like just so many first downs on here. Like every year he gets at least 50 first downs, and then touchdowns. Every year he's had at least 6. In the past 2 years, 26 combined. And as I think of the way that the Colts have used Anthony at times this year, I think that's what they hoped he could be more. Like I've noticed at times they run him more at the goal line, maybe late in games, like those got to have it moments. They had 2 game-winning drives that way. But I've called for it a little bit more early in games because I think they hoped that he would be closer to this. Like I'm sure they didn't expect full-fledged Josh Allen, but as far as not completely lean on that rushing until you have high leverage moments, but they haven't gotten the passing to let him succeed that other way. That's why, like, ultimately I thought the Jalen Hurts model was more for him, where the attempts were higher, but early on Jalen Hurts wasn't a super accurate quarterback either. So it's like they want to do it this way where he's, I think their ideal mix would be 6 to 7 and at 6 to 7.5 attempts per game for Anthony. But right now, with the style of quarterback he is, with where he is as a passer, and really, frankly, the whole offense is, as we saw on Sunday, if they're going to have a high gear, it's by the dual threat rushing of him and Jonathan Taylor. Like they need him running 8+ times a game. Well, like on Sunday, he ran, I think, 9 times, and then half a week later, he's, on the injury report. So, missing 2 practices, even though one was just a walkthrough. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's tricky, and it's like that's where, like, if he could ever take that leap as a passer, then you could have more of this Josh Allen conversation. Not only that, but you would also be able to make it less obvious when he is going to run. I think more of Josh Allen's runs are scrambles than Anthony's. Anthony doesn't tend to turn passing plays into running plays very often. He's in that mode of trying to find passes and all this. Josh will just read a situation when everyone's covered, especially when he reads man coverage, and just take off. And then he's barreling through DBs in the open field rather than linebackers and defensive linemen. So it's all part of the transition. I think it's taking longer for them than they wanted, that they have to eventually still dream to get to with him. But while they're in this space with the underdeveloped passing and still electric running, I think they do have to just try to run him. You need to get to that 9 to 11 attempt range per game, and then there's probably going to be some rest days like this, and you hope you just get through it.
Yeah. The hardest thing, I think, with the run heavy approach is, I think obviously you want them to run as much as possible. It's just the success rate of getting 335 yards is going to be so difficult.
Oh, yeah.
As explosive as Jonathan Taylor is, and I think it's fair to say, like, Jonathan Taylor has a real good shot at having 6,000 yards in his first 5 seasons. I mean, I know the opinion from a lot of Colts fans has turned on Taylor based on some ankle injuries, some the boneheaded mistake against Denver, which was obviously terrible for this team's season, especially considering what the Texans are doing or not doing. But at the same time, this is still a very dynamic runner. It's just he's not going to be able to pop a 70 and a 65-yarder every game. He didn't even do that in 2021. Anthony getting 70, 80 yards a game is great. Like, you're not going to be able to do it every game. So I think that the biggest thing for me is just, like, you want that to be the foundation of it, but it can't really be as this is the only thing we do as it was last week, or maybe how it's going to be this week, because the Giants cannot stop the run to save their lives if you don't run at Dexter Lawrence. There's some teams you can do it against. I think it's just, you've got to be able to really be like the kind of offense this team needs to have. they've got to be able to throw enough on those days when they can't average what was 6.5, 7.5 yards a carry or whatever it was on Sunday. They've got to be able to throw enough, and I think that's maybe more of my concern is, yeah, they can run. And I was also struck. I will say this: I was also struck when I was going back through their first 8 games, how inconsistent the availability was for some of those guys. Like Taylor missed his 3 games. Richardson missed his games. 2 of those games lined up, so they didn't have either of them. But then, like, there were 2 games that Taylor played where Richardson wasn't on the field at all, and they could just look at him the whole time. I think we've maybe seen that running game more this year than we realized, especially these last 5 games since Richardson came back. But injuries and the benching and stuff have kind of made it more inconsistent than we realized.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at, like, when we talk about how sustainable is it to run that much. The 2 of the offenses right now in the league that are just so impressive to the point where it wouldn't be that shocking if they met up in the Super Bowl are the Ravens and the Eagles, who have this exact model of the mobile quarterback and the superstar running back. And look at their numbers. You look like the Ravens have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are both over 800 yards. They're going to have 2 1,000-yard rushers, averaging 5.8 and 6.6 yards a carry. Derrick Henry leads the league with 14 rushing touchdowns. You flip over to the Eagles, and Jalen Hurts is running less successful than any of these other guys, but a lot of that's because he does the tush push, and he's got 14 touchdowns leading the league. Saquon is currently in the lead for the rushing title at 1,800 yards, so he could be a 2,000-yard rusher. So there is a model where it can – now we'll see if it's enough in the playoffs. For the Ravens, it hasn't been yet. But there is a model where this can be like high volume and super successful. But to your point, what you just said is you have to still pass well enough to get by with it. And both of those teams do that. And this one does not. So like Lamar Jackson, for as amazing of a rusher as he is, I mean, he is the MVP frontrunner because he also leads the NFL in touchdown passes with 39 and quarterback rating and yards per attempt, like truly awesome passing season. Jalen Hurts is having a very, very, very solid season. 18 touchdowns, 5 picks, 69% completion rate. So, like, when these guys are being asked to pass, they run so much that they're living out the offense that I envisioned on like the high end for this Colts team, which is you run so much that teams eventually are so tired of getting gashed. They put everything in the box, and then you're able to hit with advantage in the passing game. And Lamar and Jalen Hurts are doing it. This team, I don't think they've dictated defenses quite as well as these other teams have. Maybe that's what's coming off this 330-yard performance as teams just abandon the 2 high shells more. I think that would help them out. But they're not currently as equipped to do that either. They don't have, like the Eagles end have A.J. Brown. They don't have something like that on the outside right now, certainly with Michael Pittman Jr. hurt. The Ravens certainly have fewer weapons than that. It's just Lamar is really taken his game to a crazy high level now that he's chasing his 3rd MVP. So that's the thing. So like the Colts run game, there's a world where it's as talented on paper as these other run games that I just mentioned that are tearing it up, but they don't have the passing game to make it so that they can just go to it all the time. They're eventually teams are gonna do whatever they can to make them pass. When you make the Ravens or the Eagles pass, you still often lose those battles. Right now, when you make the Colts pass, for right now, that's been advantage defense. So that'll kind of be the next step is like, it's not so much about tweaking that much in the run game, though I think there's some things they can do. I think they should stick to more of what they did on Sunday with some higher level wham blocks, pulling Quentin Nelson more man concepts up front than zone concepts. I think that's how they can hit a higher gear. And remain consistent with it. But that real step to consistency is finding a passing game that makes it so that you can you make them pick their poison. You actually hit them when they do.
Yeah, the Eagles, the Ravens, it's really hard to envision a near immediate future where Richardson's having the kind of passing season that Lamar's having. Because, like you pointed out, the numbers are just so crazy with him right now. Almost 4,000 yards, 39 touchdowns, 4 picks. Wild. But like the Eagles, I think this is the interesting thing about the Eagles, because both of those teams sort of have the same like formula that I think the Colts would have to have, where you've got one running back with super high volume in terms of carries. Both Barkley and Henry are already over 300. And then the quarterback is in that 10-ish, 8 to 10 range. Jalen Hurts is 150 carries in 15 games. Lamar is, I think, 130. So they're in that range that Anthony's in as far as averaging since they came back. So they've got that stuff. But like you think about the Eagles, and this is what sort of sparked it for me. The whole storyline around the Eagles, and I admit I have not seen enough of their games, but the Eagles have run the ball 554 times, and the whole storyline has been if they get stopped, they can't throw the ball well enough. But if you look at Jalen Hurts' numbers, he's completing 68.7% of his passes. He's averaging 8 yards per attempt. Like, he's been sacked 38 times, and there obviously have been games that passing game has not been good, but like those numbers sort of highlight to me how far Richardson has to come as a passer for this offense to really be what it's supposed to be. Because, the whole storyline in Philly has been the Eagles can't pass. I mean, if Richardson had Jalen Hurts numbers right now, we'd be talking about when are they going to sign his extension.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think it's certainly the quarterback position and how different that is. Hold up here.
Grady has thoughts. Grady has some thoughts. Nate's working on it. His dog is upset about rushing yardage from quarterbacks. I can't tell if Grady wants less passes, more passes. I don't speak dog, and my dog Yelly is out in the living room with the kids, so it's hard to know exactly what Grady's trying to say here. But he's got some thoughts on this rushing attack. Nate's still trying to get him calmed down a little bit.
Yeah, it could be the mailman he thinks is here to kill us, or he could he's not into the passing game. He just wants to run the damn ball all day. Not about passing. You're getting away from the point. I think he was upset with my bad takes there, so we'll let him cool down from all that. Yeah, that was a cameo. That's the challenge of doing this at home sometimes. But yeah, I'm trying to remember where we were. Oh yeah, what I was going to say was that it's clearly the biggest difference is the quarterback ability and where they're at right now in their trajectory in their careers. Lamar's 27, Jalen Hurts is 26. These guys have been MVP finishers, started for a while. They've hit their stride. And Anthony is young and has not, but I think it's the entire passing game too, at least like related to the Eagles. So part of what helped Jalen Hurts make his jump where he was he went from accuracy 52 to 61 to 66 in 3 years. One thing they did in that span is they went out and they got A.J. Brown and they drafted Devontae Smith. And they kind of rounded this out to where they made life a little easier when he did throw, that it didn't have to necessarily be perfect ball placement. And even with like A.J. Brown, a big appeal to him was that he doesn't have to even be technically open to have the comfort to throw that pass because he's that kind of contested catch guy. The Colts just don't – this year's version of the Colts, I don't think have had the best setup all around for passing success. So that starts with the quarterback who's –
They need Pittman healthy. They need last year's Pittman, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like that last year's Pittman is not A.J. Brown, but in terms of like the contested short catches, that kind of stuff, like that version of Pittman, I think changes things because I'm looking at the Eagles. The Eagles don't have an Alec Pierce.
Yeah.
Brown kind of does that for them. Like their numbers, the you're probably working your way here, but I'll set you up for this. There's something the Eagles have that the Colts very much do not in this passing game. But like their receiving numbers are very much essentially three guys. And I think you could maybe kind of replicate this in a different way, but I think you need a healthy Josh Downs and you need Pittman at the last 3 years level and not what he's been this year while he deals with a back injury.
Yeah, I think the thing you were hinting at that the Eagles have that the Colts do not would be called a tight end.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Dallas Goedert is very, very good. This team does not have tight ends. Yeah, I think it's a mix of a lot of things that you touched on. You know, Michael Pittman, when they extended him in the offseason, I think a lot of that vision is this type of – he's going to be a high volume, in-breaking route receiver, intermediate type, short and intermediate receiver that could get Anthony in rhythm, who didn't have to be technically open all the time, who could be that late safety valve when guys are covered. And he just hasn't been able to be that guy very much this year. You look at the other ends of it, and it's like Josh Downs' availability has not been all the way there. He's missed 3 games. Now, he's been very good in the games he has played. So maybe in the, like when he's played, he's a little closer to Devontae Smith. Just a little different. Devontae's an outside guy, obviously a little bit more established, but Josh is on his way. But it's, you know, he's missed 3. Josh has missed 3 games, and so those 2 things have really added up when you don't have a tight end, you don't have running backs that catch passes, and then the other wide receivers beyond those 2 would be Alec Pierce, who's good but limited in volume for the role he has, and then A.D. Mitchell has not been able to come through in that other spot. So it's all interconnected. It's just like the passing game on every level of this, it doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't feel set up. It's like the things that they have most of the time are when Josh Downs plays, you have really nice slot receiver. You have a great deep threat in Alec Pierce who can do a few intermediate catches here and there, but they don't have that high volume outside guy, and they don't have a tight end. They don't have a running back, and then they don't have the quarterback. The most important part is the passer himself being accurate and consistent. And so, yeah, they're just far off. It's just interesting to compare them to those 2 other teams because both of the Eagles and Ravens went out and signed the big-time running back this offseason. Eagles with Saquon Barkley and the Ravens with Derrick Henry. I think they made great cases for why, you know, high-end running backs are worth paying or different than they're not. You cannot just go find a Derrick Henry or a Saquon Barkley in the draft, and how you can really build a winning team this way. But the difference is where those quarterbacks are and where those teams were. Eagles in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, Ravens had the number 1 seed last year, and those quarterbacks are already MVP finishers. Like they had enough of a passing game to then take their running game to like the 85th level and feel like they could go to the playoffs and become that team that runs in the cold weather and all that. The Colts, what we're seeing is just kind of these differing timelines that seem to be kind of the story of their franchise right now. We've talked a lot on this podcast about like the timelines as far as the GM and the head coach and quarterback, but you add the running back into this where we went, how many times do we debate whether or not you pay a running back? Well, they finally did it. And I think Jonathan Taylor's worth it, but it is worth wondering, like, can they get the value of that contract out of it with where their quarterback is right now, where their roster is as a team that hasn't been in the playoffs since 2020. I think you made this point, so I'll let you kind of go with it. But like running backs and the Eagles and Ravens are showing this, they're better as like finishing pieces to like a team build than like the thing you start with.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you like look at like in one way, this has been a big year for running backs because 3 of the top 4 rushers in the NFL, including the 2 that are making a bid for 2,000-yard season, were signed to big contracts in free agency, which is what you're theoretically not supposed to do, but it's worked out very well for the Eagles, Ravens, and Packers. The difference is the Eagles already had an offense, and they were adding something that they didn't have to that offense, and their passing game hasn't quite been what it was, but it gave them an avenue to exploit instead of just Jalen Hurts' legs. Henry for Baltimore, I think everyone has always known that Baltimore would be a great place for a running back. But that position, until Henry got there, has had a vicious curse on it from an injury standpoint. Anybody who plays fantasy and has tinkered with Baltimore Ravens running backs the last 5 years or so knows, like, it's been a wasteland in terms of ACLs and everything that's happened to them until Henry got there. Green Bay with Josh Jacobs, that's another offense where you look at it and Aaron Jones was very successful. It wasn't durable enough. Josh Jacobs is durable, but like you look at it, that's all established offenses that they came into and kind of filled a role. Jonathan Taylor is that kind of back. Like, I know he doesn't receive the ball that well. So maybe he doesn't offer that piece of it. But in terms of the running, which is really what these guys are doing for the most part, he is the explosive type of player. He's 8th in the league in rushing, even after missing 3 games. And we've seen the last couple of weeks, he can still get past people and run away from them in the secondary. Like you said, the problem is for long stretches of the season, they've been asking him to be all of it in one way or the other. And they don't have anything to go off of it. I was looking at the Eagles numbers a little bit more just because it's interesting. The Eagles are averaging a shade under 27 pass attempts per game. That feels like a sweet spot for me. Yeah. Like you don't need Richardson to be able to you don't need Richardson. You don't want Nate Richardson to throw it 37 times a game. I think you need him to be able to throw it in that 25 to 27 times a game and be successful to really be an offense that looks something different than what we've seen this year. He's got to be able to do that and be successful. Maybe like a elongated version of what we saw last week, where he's 7 for 11 for 131 yards, is more what you want. Where it's in the 14 of 22, 13 of 23, high yards per attempt like Hurts has. That's what you got to be able to do, even if you don't have the completion percentage. 13 of 24, you're a little bit under it. 13 of 25, but you have the yards per attempt. I think that's maybe more where they need to be. And if they're going to stick with him going into next year, which it feels like that's what's going to happen based on everything we've heard. I don't feel like we have a good handle on anything since we've heard less from Jim Irsay than we ever have before. But like, it feels like that's where we're headed next year. I think that's what they've got to be shooting for. Is you don't want him throwing the ball 35 times a game. You want to be able to, I think you're going to have to, like you said all year, run the ball. But he's got to be able to make 25 passes a game count to really have the kind of offense that can take advantage of teams and get this team to the point where they're so middle of the ground, middle of the road. We were saying this earlier in the before we came home when we were at the facility. Like, there's so many bad teams in the NFL this year, and the Colts clearly aren't one of those because they keep beating them. That they've got 7 wins, they've got no shot at the top 10 because there's so many teams like that have like 4 wins or less. But they also don't beat any good teams. They're like the most middle of the road you can beat. Yeah. And even their 1 win over a winning team, the Steelers, is getting devalued week by week as they lose 3 straight, and then you throw in the fact that they were playing their backup quarterback at the time. Yeah, that's the issue. The issue for me is, like, you've got to do something to get yourself over the hump, and you can do it with the Eagles are showing you can do it with maybe not the most consistent explosive passing game, but they have a passing game. The Colts often don't have a passing game.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Eagles are the clearest model because obviously that's where Shane Steichen came from, and a lot of drafting Anthony Richardson was getting a guy he saw flashes of Jalen Hurts, and so like the passing game number you brought up, the attempts. I looked back at Shane's first season with Jalen Hurts in 2021. Jalen Hurts averaged 28.8 attempts a game, so 29, right around 29. Now, he didn't have an amazing passing season. He only had 16 touchdowns, 9 picks, completed 61%, but they went 9-7 or 9-8, I think it was, and they made the playoffs. And like, if this team went 9-8, made the playoffs, but they don't ultimately have a good enough passing game. I thought coming into the year that'd be good enough if the passing game was closer. If we're talking, I don't think Andy was going to go 61%, but if he's at 58% accuracy,
Well, if he's at 58% accuracy with 16 touchdowns and 9 picks, and his yards per attempt is 7.3 or 4-ish, I think number one, I think the Colts win the division, and number two, the way we're talking about this team is okay. We actually see the future here possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I know the fan base doesn't feel like that, but that's because the numbers have been so bad. Like honestly, as much as we talk about the fumble from JT in Denver and some of the other miscues, like if they had just been able to get the throwing game going in that game a little bit more in the second and third quarters, JT's fumble maybe becomes more of a footnote than one of the worst mistakes we've ever seen.
Yeah, the passing game, it just hasn't. It's both those. Like coming into the year, I thought to make this a successful season, two things needed to happen. They make the playoffs, which would improve upon last year's just missing it, and then Anthony Richardson has a encouraging season because that's what that season for the Eagles was in 2021. They made the playoffs before they got blown out by the Buccaneers, and Jalen Hurts had an encouraging season that wasn't a for sure, no doubt about it type thing. And then that's when they went on AJ Brown to get their answers. And not only did they get their answers, they hit the ceiling. They went to the Super Bowl, and Shane wound up here. That should have been the path, but it's like, I'll go back to the Jonathan Taylor end of this when we were debating that, and not just we, the Colts front office debating, do you sign Jonathan Taylor last season? What Chris Ballard told us was the hesitation at the time was they'd only won 4 games the year before. So he wasn't really in this mindset of got to lock these guys in. They're trying to figure out their window. They're trying to figure out their quarterback. Is he ready? Then he's shown a couple of flashes and they signed him. The big thing, though, with that I think they still did not handle right is they needed to pick a lane. If you're going to sign the running back, it's because you're going to try to win with him right now, not wait 5 years. So like these other teams we brought up, Ravens and Eagles, they're going for it right now. Now it's easier for them to go for the jugular that immediate season. But for the Colts, they needed to live in that mindset if they were signing Jonathan Taylor. So that's why I think they should have gone after more free agents, a difference-making type of defender that was available in free agency. Just try to be that right now. And then we may be having the same conversation with Anthony Richardson. I think he would know it even more if he had tight ends and running backs to for sure throw to. If you had this team that felt like it was being held back only by the quarterback, you would get your answers quicker. Or what would happen with Jalen Hurts had a chance to happen where you hit that ceiling. If they didn't think they were close back when they signed Jonathan Taylor, they could have traded him and not tried to go in right now on some of these pieces that are starting to age on this roster, which is Jonathan Taylor and running back years. Quentin Nelson and DeForest Buckner, guys are getting to their 30s, and they're wasting the windows for a few of these really good players who are just not able to lift this whole thing up. And that's where they've kind of chosen to live in the middle, where they re-signed some quite good players, but they don't really add the pieces around them. And then they have such a young quarterback and a young overall passing game that they're like you said, perfectly in the middle. They can run enough and wreck enough offenses up front that are bad to beat the bad teams. It's not good enough passing game. It's not difference enough plays made on defense to beat the good teams. So they feel kind of stuck in this 7-9 win rut right now, that's a tough spot to be in with your running back, who we know there's just a certain shelf life to a lot of these guys, unless maybe he's wants to be Derrick Henry is sort of the, proven to be kind of a crazy outlier. He's 30 now, having, another rushing title type season. So maybe Jonathan Taylor can age that way. I wouldn't bet on that, though. I think they needed to pick a lane, either rebuild around Anthony Richardson in the short term, or like really build this thing out to try and hit a quick ceiling in the rookie quarterback contract window of Anthony Richardson with this all-pro running back. It feels like they're kind of doing neither of those and just kind of content in the middle of them.
Yeah, Saquon's kind of interesting too, because for a long time, the storyline with Saquon was this is a guy that can't stay healthy. Great player to have when he is healthy, but a lot of missed games in there. And then, who knows? I mean, he's had so many carries this year. You wonder how it's going to look going on from next year. But like, he's sort of the guy who, like, you think, okay, he started having injury issues. I don't know if he can ever be that guy again. Well, he went to Philly and he found. Now, granted, Philly's offensive line is crazy, but he went to Philly and it turned out that as long as he was healthy, he was still Saquon.
Yeah, Saquon. I think he and Jonathan Taylor are similar abilities. Saquon's better in the passing game. That's probably the biggest difference, pass pro and receiving. As runners, though, if you put Jonathan Taylor in that Eagles offense right now and ask him to do the same things, run-wise, I think he could win a rushing title because we've already seen him win a rushing title. And then I think we saw on Sunday, there were a few conversations out there about, does Jonathan Taylor still have that like high gear, or did those ankle injuries take that breakaway element out of his game? Well, Sunday gave us, I think, a pretty clear answer when he's running like 23 miles an hour and dusting that safety that you pointed out ran a 4.6 and not being touched to the end zone for 65 plus yards. Like,
Poor
he's got
Darryl Worley.
one Barkley breakaway. It's just, it's not the same offense around him.
Poor Darryl Worley.
Just catching strays. What's funny is like, in basketball they talk about like posterizing, and it's very easy to see who's getting posterized. In football, it's just like there's a defender so far in the distance, and he's got like a helmet on, and Joel's like letting you know who that is in the poster. So you were,
I didn't notice it until I went back and watched the last two games, the two runs back to back. I was like, oh look, 35. Wait, who's 35? And then I was like, oh, you know what? Wait, what was his 40 time? I'm curious. Yeah. And it did. None of it turned out well for him.
No. Well, these great runners, they put guys on a poster like that time. Like the poor souls, Derrick Henry has stiff armed into the turf. Have I
thought for a second you were gonna say the guy Saquon jumped over backwards, and I was gonna be like, Nate, that's never happened before in the NFL, and it never will again.
Oh yeah, that's another good poster. Yeah, it's tough. It's like there's three backfields right now that are just athletically on a different planet than what we often see in the NFL. They're built around passing games, and it's a cool thing too, like that these exist in this world of two high shells, where it's like it shows you kind of the chess match in the NFL where all these defenses start running the same defensive structure because it's like, hey, we take away the deep pass, we make teams drive, it's not going to work. And there are numbers that bear it out for a little bit, showing that offense is froze. And then this is the counter, is that smart teams like the Ravens and Eagles found their counter by building some of the most athletic backfields you'll ever see. So I like that philosophically from the Colts. I'm waiting to see them complete the puzzle, like run the right system for your offensive line, add the tight ends, add the backup running backs, because God forbid how this system looks like if Jonathan Taylor goes down, not nearly the same thing. And then, try to get into the postseason, because that's what I'm fascinated to see, is if the Ravens and Eagles, if this is going to be enough to get to the Super Bowl, the level they've been running at, and are their passing games enough up to par for that level of the game? And if they are, then they'll have shown you that, like, we've come a long way from the conversations of like can't ever pay a running back that were happening just like a year and a half ago.
Yep. But you've got to be able to pass, and that's the thing we still don't know. And like you said in our last podcast, the Giants aren't going to tell us that.
No, they're not. I don't think the Jaguars are going to tell us that either.
Also, we might be seeing a lot of running game on Sunday, because have you looked at the forecast for New Jersey on Sunday?
No.
It gonna rain.
Oh, dang it! I wanted a snow game.
It's gonna rain like a lot. Right. When I looked earlier when we were in the locker room and somebody brought this up to me, it was a 97% chance of rain.
Oh, wow.
And like temperatures in the 50s. And
we have a battle of one struggling passer against a backup quarterback. So probably a lot of handoffs.
And shockingly, and by shockingly, I mean not shockingly, Since then, it has stayed the same. The forecast for Sunday is still 57 degrees, 97% chance of rain. AccuWeather says breezy and milder with periods of rain becoming heavy. Watch for flooding on streets and poor drainage areas. Maybe not the best passing environment.
Nope. No, I don't think so. It's well, we may get. I don't think we're going to get 335 rushing yards out of the Colts, but we may get the 50 attempts. They'd probably like that.
Yeah. So that's what we got. We still don't know if the Colts will be eliminated or not. We'll find that out on Saturday. I full disclosure, I don't think I'm going to be watching that Broncos game when it happens. I'll be aware of it, but I don't think I'm going to be glued to it. I will obviously. Everyone's going to know where the Chargers are because it's the early game. But yeah, if both of those teams win, then you're going to have the Colts being eliminated. If not, they will go into the Giants game and maybe the next week with a chance still left over. But for the most part, unless the miracle strikes, we got to try to project what they might do going into next year. So I think this conversation about running has been good. Hopefully you guys all
part of this comes down to if the Broncos, if they beat the Bengals on Saturday and the Colts win, then the part of the miracle they're banking on at that point is going to have to come from Carson Wentz.
Yep.
The Chiefs are going to rest their starters against the Broncos, but they got to win. The Colts to have the little three-way tie scenario. So,
or the Chargers can lose back-to-back games to the Patriots and Raiders.
That sounds like
something that's not going to happen.
It's more of a miracle.
Yep. So that's the Colts' playoff chances. We will see where they are going into Sunday. Hope you guys all had a Merry Christmas. Hope you guys either enjoyed your traditional dinner or are on the process of finding one. Or you know what? It's Christmas. If you guys like to do something different every year, I'm not here to judge. Just eat good food in celebration. Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate. Happy holidays to those of you who don't celebrate Christmas. In my family, we used to celebrate Christmas with extended family often on January 1st. Usually my dad's side of the family would be a New Year's Day thing. So my Christmas lights on my house will be up until at least the 2nd. For those of you who are celebrating late. And generally a lot of people around us do the same. So enjoy your holidays. Those of you who are not sports writers or people working in ministry or several other professions where you still have to work, if you are enjoying your break, really enjoy your break. So have a good one. This has been the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I'm Joel Erickson. We'll talk to you again after Colts Giants.